The man from the county arrived at 8:14 on a Tuesday morning in April of 2023. He came in a white county vehicle with the Harlan County seal on the door, and he brought two others with him, a surveyor and a woman carrying a clipboard. And when Earl Maddox opened the front door, the man held up a laminated identification card and said, loudly enough that the neighbor across the road could have heard him from a porch, "Mr. Maddox, this property has been placed under formal condemnation order. You have 90 days to vacate the designated 340 acres of Harlan County Parcel 7-14-A. He said it the way a man says something he has said before. Flat. Practiced. Like reading from a list. Then he said, "The county has determined this land reverted to public domain in 1989. We're formalizing what was already decided." Earl Maddox looked at the card. He looked at the man. He looked at the surveyor and the woman with the clipboard, both of them studying the gravel. He said, "All right." Then he stepped back inside and closed the door. The surveyor looked at the woman with the clipboard. The man from the county waited a moment, then turned and walked back to the white vehicle. He had 14 more stops scheduled before Friday. Earl Maddox had farmed 340 acres in the hill country of Harlan County, Kentucky, for 47 years. He was 71 years old. His father, Raymond Maddox, had handed him the keys to the farmhouse in the spring of 1976 when Raymond was 58 and came home from a long illness and understood that his working years were finished. The land had been in the family since Raymond's own father broke ground on the Eastern Ridge in 1931. 92 years of continuous cultivation across 3 generations. Earl had been born on this land. He had never lived anywhere else. The farm ran from the county road at the bottom of the ridge to the eastern tree line at the top. 340 acres of hayfields, creek bottom, and hardwood slope. There was a branch called Clover Creek along the southern edge that ran shallow in August and loud in March. Earl knew every foot of it, where it slowed around the limestone shelf, where the water ran cold even in summer. There was a red barn built in 1952, still standing, leaning slightly south now from 4 decades of Kentucky winters. And at the eastern boundary, where the field met the tree line, there was a white oak that Earl's grandfather had marked with a carved X when he walked the survey himself in 1931. A mark that had grown with the tree and was still visible in the bark if you knew where to look. Earl had farmed through the drought of 1988, when he lost 60% of his hay yield and paid his property taxes from savings he had taken 3 years to build. He had farmed through the bad winter of 1994, when the barn roof failed under ice, and he spent 11 days in February rebuilding it alone because he could not afford a crew. He had farmed through his wife Dorothy's illness. She had been diagnosed in the fall of 2018, and she died in the spring of 2019. And during the 8 months between those 2 dates, Earl had kept every field, every fence line, every piece of equipment running because Dorothy had told him that the land did not stop because they had stopped. And she was right, and he had listened. Dorothy had kept the household records for 44 years. Every payment, every tax receipt, every utility bill, filed by year in a set of manila folders in the kitchen cabinet. Earl had not touched them since she died. He did not need to. Dorothy's system was complete, and he knew where everything was. Raymond Maddox had died in 1987, when Earl was 36. Raymond had left behind very little of material value: a Ford pickup that needed an engine, a handmade quilt, his Bible. And inside that Bible, in the back, folded twice and tucked flat against the back cover, was 1 page. Raymond had mentioned it exactly once. It was 2 months before he died, and Earl was sitting with him on the porch in the early evening, and Raymond said without preamble, "If anyone ever comes for the land, look in the Bible before you do anything else." Earl had asked what was in there. Raymond said, "A record of what belongs to us." Earl had not looked. For 36 years he had not looked. The Bible sat on the shelf in the bedroom closet, behind Dorothy's church dresses, on the left side of the top shelf. He knew exactly where it was because Dorothy had put it there the week after Raymond's funeral, and he had never moved it. He went upstairs and got it that same morning. The man from the county had not yet pulled out of the driveway when Earl opened the Bible. He unfolded the page carefully. The paper was heavier than he expected, cream-colored and dense, with a raised seal in the lower left corner from the Harlan County Clerk's office. It was dated March 3, 1959. It bore Raymond Maddox's signature in a careful, practiced hand, and the countersignature of a notary named H.L. Combs. At the top, in plain typeface, it read, "Mineral rights deed with surface use restriction." Earl read it once, then set it down. He looked out the window. The white county vehicle was gone. He picked up the phone. The man responsible for the condemnation of Earl Maddox's land was not the man who came to the door. The man who came to the door was employed to deliver notices. The man responsible was Craig Westfield, 38 years old, J.D. from the University of Louisville, lead counsel for municipal land acquisition in the Harlan County Legal Services Office. Westfield had joined the county 8 years earlier after 2 years at a commercial real estate firm in Lexington. He was the first dedicated acquisition attorney the county had employed. Before him, the county had contracted land work piecemeal, case by case. Westfield had changed that. He had built a systematic process: identify parcels with title ambiguity or tax record gaps, file condemnation claims under eminent domain, move each one through the process as efficiently as legally permissible, and transfer the land to county infrastructure use. In 2022 alone, he had processed 41 such claims. His performance review was measured in parcels resolved per quarter. Harlan County had committed to a natural gas distribution project, a combined pipeline and access road corridor running along the eastern ridge, contracted to a regional energy company. Earl Maddox's 340 acres sat directly in the corridor's path. In February of 2023, Westfield's office commissioned a standard title search on parcel 7-14-A. The search returned a 1989 county assessor's notation indicating that a tax lien had been placed against the property following Raymond Maddox's death and had never been formally discharged in the county's digital record system. Westfield's team reviewed the notation. They did not pull the underlying paper records from the clerk's archive. They did not request the original lien documentation. They did not trace the full chain of title through the physical files. The notation was sufficient for their purposes. The condemnation order was drafted and signed. Westfield spent 2 hours on the Maddox file before authorizing the proceeding. The attorney Earl called was Susan Brierly, a land law practitioner based in Harlan, who had been handling property disputes in eastern Kentucky for 29 years. She was 61 years old. She had worked coal company boundary cases, easement disputes, adverse possession claims, family partition suits. She knew how the county's acquisition office operated, and she knew Craig Westfield's filing patterns. She agreed to meet with Earl that afternoon. He drove the 23 miles into Harlan with the Bible on the passenger seat. He set it on Brierly's desk and unfolded the 1959 document in front of her. She read it without speaking. She turned it over. She looked at the clerk's seal. She read it again, more slowly the second time. When she finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at Earl. She said, "Where has this been?" He said, "In the Bible." She said, "For how long?" He said, "Since 1987. The document was a mineral rights deed executed by Raymond Maddox in March of 1959, reserving full subsurface mineral rights to the Maddox family in perpetuity. Mineral rights separation from surface rights had been common practice in eastern Kentucky since the early 20th century. Coal companies had purchased subsurface rights from farmers across the region for generations, and many families had learned to reserve them when the opportunity arose. Raymond had reserved his. But what distinguished the 1959 deed was a clause on page 2, paragraph 4. The clause stated, in precise legal language, that any use of the surface of the property that would physically disturb, restrict, or alter the established subsurface mineral access corridors, including the installation of pipelines, constructed access roads, or any county or state infrastructure, required the written consent of the mineral rights holder and could not proceed under eminent domain authority without a separate and independent compensation proceeding specifically for the mineral rights interest, irrespective of any surface title claim or condemnation order. Westfield's office had noted the existence of the 1959 deed in their own title abstract. It appeared on page 4, line 7 of the condemnation filing, flagged in a parenthetical notation as an inactive instrument, surface rights only. They had identified it. They had named it in their own paperwork. They had not read paragraph 4. Brierly looked at Earl over the desk. She said, "This is either everything or it's nothing." Earl said, "Raymond drove to that clerk's office in 1959. He paid a notary. He put it in a Bible and told me about it once, and then he died. I don't think he thought it was nothing." Brierly filed a motion to stay the condemnation within 72 hours, attaching the 1959 deed as Exhibit A. Westfield's office responded with a 4-page counterfiling, arguing that the deed was a legacy instrument with no operative force under current eminent domain statute, that surface condemnation for public infrastructure superseded mineral rights restrictions under established Kentucky case law, and that the county's title search had adequately identified and assessed all instruments of record. It was a thorough filing. It cited precedent correctly. It did not address paragraph 4 by name. 3 weeks later, at a preliminary hearing before a county hearing officer, Westfield appeared with 2 junior attorneys and a bound volume of county infrastructure documentation. He looked across the table at Brierly and at the 1959 deed lying flat in front of her, and he said, in front of the hearing officer, the court reporter, and both of his associates, "Counselor, I appreciate the effort here, but a mineral deed from the Eisenhower administration is not going to stop a county infrastructure project in 2023. He paused. He said, "We'll see each other in court." One of the junior attorneys wrote something down. The hearing was held on September 9, 2023, in courtroom 2 of the Harlan County Courthouse. The room was small, wood-paneled walls, a single American flag in the corner beside the bench, 2 ceiling fans turning without cooling anything. Judge Patricia Hensley had served on the Harlan County Circuit Court for 22 years. She was 64 years old. Attorneys who appeared before her regularly knew that she read every document in a filing the night before the hearing date. Not summaries, the documents themselves. Westfield's team arrived first. 3 attorneys now, the 2 from the preliminary hearing and a senior associate from a Louisville firm brought in for the occasion. They spread across the plaintiff's table, 4 folders per attorney, matching leather binders, a laptop open at the center. Westfield spoke briefly with the senior associate and did not look toward the courtroom door. Earl arrived 7 minutes before the session began. He wore a clean white shirt, pressed the night before. He had driven the 2004 Chevrolet pickup he'd owned for 19 years, the same truck he used to haul hay in September, and he parked it in the same gravel lot he'd always used when he came to Harlan for business. He sat down beside Brierly and placed his hat on the table in front of him. He did not look at the plaintiff's table. Judge Hensley entered at exactly 9 o'clock. She set a thick folder on the bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and surveyed both tables for a long moment before sitting. Westfield's senior associate presented the county's case for 17 minutes. He was methodical and practiced. He laid out the public infrastructure need, the applicable eminent domain standard, the 1989 tax lien notation, and its implications for title, the condemnation procedure followed by the county, and the county's determination that the 1959 mineral deed was a historical instrument without operative force under current law. He cited 4 cases by full citation. He was almost convincing. He concluded by stating that the county stood ready to offer Earl Maddox the assessed compensation of $112,000 for the surface rights to parcel 7-14-A, and that this offer was fair, lawful, and final. Brierly spoke for 2 sentences. She said, "Your Honor, the county's own condemnation filing identifies the 1959 Maddox mineral deed on page 4, line 7, as an instrument of record. It is not a historical artifact. It is a recorded easement with an active surface use restriction under paragraph 4 of that instrument, and the county proceeded with condemnation without determining the legal status of that restriction, despite having identified the deed themselves." She slid a copy of the county's condemnation filing across the table toward the bench. Page 4 was tabbed. Judge Hensley picked it up. She found page 4. She read it. The courtroom was quiet. Westfield's senior associate turned to his own copy and found the tab. He leaned toward Westfield. Whatever he said it low enough that no one else heard it. Westfield did not respond. Judge Hensley set down the condemnation filing and picked up Exhibit A, the 1959 deed. She turned to page 2. She read paragraph 4. She set both documents down on the bench in front of her and looked at the plaintiff's table. She said, "Mr. Westfield, at the time your office prepared and filed this condemnation proceeding, did your team make a determination as to whether the surface use restriction in paragraph 4 of the 1959 instrument had been legally discharged, superseded, or otherwise rendered inoperative?" Westfield said, "Your Honor, our position is that the instrument was identified and assessed as inactive." Hensley said, "That's not what I asked." One of the ceiling fans turned. No one spoke. Westfield opened his binder and turned several pages. He closed it. He said, "No, Your Honor." Judge Hensley's written ruling arrived 11 days later. It was 14 pages. She found that the county's condemnation of Parcel 7-14A was procedurally void. The 1959 Maddox mineral deed was a valid recorded instrument, properly filed with the Harlan County Clerk's Office, with an active surface use restriction under paragraph 4. The county had identified the instrument's existence in its own filing, and had proceeded with condemnation without making any determination as to the operative status of that restriction. The condemnation was set aside in full. The 340 acres remained in Earl Maddox's name, unencumbered. Damages were awarded at $387,000, covering Brierly's legal fees, the costs of the stay proceedings, and the documented income loss from the 5-month disruption to an active mineral rights lease negotiation that the condemnation order had halted. The county did not appeal. Craig Westfield was reassigned to a different division within 60 days of the ruling. The county's eminent domain acquisition program was suspended, pending an external review of all 41 condemnation proceedings filed in 2022. Earl Maddox drove home from Harlan the same afternoon the written ruling arrived in his mailbox. He parked the truck in the gravel drive, sat for a few minutes with the window down and the engine off. He could hear Clover Creek from where he sat. Then he got out and walked to the eastern boundary. The white oak was still there. At its base, set into the ground at an angle that time had corrected to level, was a flat stone marker Raymond had placed himself the spring after Earl was born. Raymond Arthur Maddox, 1921 to 1987. Moss had grown across the bottom half. The carved letters were still clear. Earl stood there for a long time. The ridge above the tree line had gone orange with late afternoon. He reached into his chest pocket and took out the 1959 deed. He looked at his father's signature at the bottom. Raymond Arthur Maddox, written in the careful, deliberate hand of a man who understood what he was signing and why. He looked at the date, March 3rd, 1959. Raymond had been 38 years old. He had driven to this courthouse, paid a notary named H.L. Combs, and had one document made. Then he had put it in a Bible and said almost nothing about it for 28 years. Earl refolded the document along its original creases. He put it back in his chest pocket. He said, "All right, Raymond, I got it." Then he turned and walked back across the land. There is a kind of foresight that does not look like foresight from the outside. Raymond Maddox was not a lawyer and not a wealthy man. He was a farmer with 340 acres and a working knowledge of how land worked in eastern Kentucky, and he understood that what is not recorded does not exist. He drove to a county courthouse in 1959, and he had a single document prepared, and he put it where it would be found by the person who needed to find it. That document sat folded in a Bible for 64 years. It waded through 3 county administrations, 5 infrastructure plans, 41 condemnation filings, and one Tuesday morning in April, when a man with a laminated card said the land had already been decided. It waited, precise and unchanged, and it was enough. Not a courtroom drama, not a lucky break. A recorded document and a father who understood that patience and precision are the same thing across long enough time. If you've watched this far, you already understand something most people don't. Next time, a 73-year-old woman in Uvalde County, Texas, received a certified letter from a bank she had never borrowed from, claiming her late husband owed $218,000 on a loan that bore his signature, dated 5 years after he died. She had one document in her possession that the bank's own auditors had never seen. Subscribe, and we'll be here when it posts. We'll see you there.